Welcome to Inside Asia, an SCB podcast about Asian economies and financial markets. My name is Sean Yokota, head of markets for Asia. Today, Frederick Hennel is a bit tied up, my partner in crime, but we have invited back Eugenia Victorino, who is the head of Asia strategy.
Hi, Sean. Good to be back. It's been a few months.
Today, we're going to have a bit of the two sessions. First one, a smaller part on China. I was there last month, kind of the feedback from there. But the second, more bigger part will be on Vietnam. Mostly, it's a deep down on the Southeast Asia conversation we had with Eugenia last time. But funny enough, when I was in China, a lot of people were asking me about Vietnam. So I thought it would be a very good starting point. And so today, Eugenia, with Vietnam, we'll hear weird phrases like blazing furnace and bamboo diplomacy. So those are the buzzwords kicking around, and we'll get deeper into that. So as usual, before we start, we'll talk a little bit about markets. So since Eugenia is here, maybe you can give us what you see in markets that kind of stand out.
Well, yeah, so recently we've been talking about the yen, how weak it has been. But the truth is, the market's really just stuck. Everybody's waiting for the Fed to cut, and it seems that the Fed is just happy to be patient. And in this environment, the easiest thing to do is just to go for carry trade, which means you just sell the yen against every currency there is. Just today, we've already seen the pound yen reaching a 16-year high, and we're also seeing the same thing against the euro. What can I say? When it's carry, it's almost free money. It's difficult to turn yourself away from that.
Yes, we're recording this on May 29th today in the afternoon in Singapore. And as you talked about the yen trade, everybody's on these carry trades, which may be fantastic when it's moving in your favor. But it's when this thing turns around and yen starts strengthening again, the dollar is going to be very small opening, everybody trying to get out at the same time. Should we be worried about that?
I guess so. In the markets, the trend is your friend until it's not. So you just have to be aware that everybody's on the same train with you. But as I said, it's difficult to say no to free money.
5% kind of carry for 1 year for yen shorts, or it's a very good rate to be getting. All right, so then we'll move on to the first subject, which is on China. And so the most important thing that I got out of there was this domino effect that you're seeing from the weakness in the property market. And so what that's leading to is the words we hear about overcapacity and increase in competition from Chinese companies. So what's happening is that since the property market is very weak, interest rates are very low. And at the same time, the government needs to create growth because property and the things linked to it can be almost one third of the economy. So, in order to generate more growth, Chinese officials are looking around saying, well, what can we really get going to generate growth? And that's where this manufacturing, exports, tech has picked up, where government's supporting them in order to generate growth. And so this is the knock-on effect of the weaker property market is that you're getting this overcapacity issues again. And Chinese companies, they're getting cheap funding from the banks because interest rates are low to help the property sector, and that's kind of fueling them to more add more capacity.
So, was it all doom and gloom in China? I have a feeling that like market is just too eager to be negative on China, and it's very difficult to be negative on China when you're still making money. Or are you still making money in China? Is there still opportunities to be had?
Yeah, so this is when I came in and left, I did become a bit more optimistic than before the trip. And that's because you hear about China and it's all about disinvestment or reducing China exposure to diversify. But it's the first time where I'm hearing reinvestment starting to pick up again within the European corporates. And the reinvestments are meant to make sure that you don't lose competition to Chinese companies. So if you don't invest in China and keep up, you'll be run over not just in China, but these Chinese companies. They're going to set up factories in Europe or they'll try to sell in Europe. So you have to compete with them anyways. So the best thing to do is to buckle up, invest, and try to compete with these Chinese companies head on their turf. So maybe China is starting to sound like a Premier League that this is the top of the competition. And if you want to be the very best companies in the world, you got to invest and compete with these Chinese companies.
So that's basically going on the supply side. But then what about the demand? Are we actually ever going to see a recovery from the Chinese consumer? Or is it done? Or is it as good as it's ever going to get?
Yeah, so this was like the mega theme from 10 years ago that the Chinese 1.4 billion consumers are going to come and generate demand all over the world. And it was supposed to help out the Chinese economy as it rebalances away from exports and into domestic demand. But there are a couple things going against them. Number one is the property market. So if your property prices are going down, your net wealth is going down. So it's hard for you to go out and buy, get some credit cards, leverage up, and buy everything. So that's been a bit tough. The other part is that I don't think President Xi is really keen on going the US model of relying on households to generate growth because that could also lead to debt issues as well or property issues like you have in the US. It's still tough, but if you think about growth, I think maybe you were growing 20, 30% in sales 10 years ago, 20 years ago. And what people I talk to say bad means, okay, it's not 20, 30%, now it's 10%. So it's all a relative game. 10% to me sounds fantastic.
10% of such a very big company, of a very big economy, is more than fantastic in my view. Like, if they're not spending as much as we hope for them to be spending, but we definitely see them buying gold, aren't we?
Yeah, this is another one where you and I know that there's been a little bit of talk that maybe China's ready to devalue their currency. And if they're going to devalue its currency because the dollar's stronger, that's why they've been buying a lot of gold to prepare for this. I don't know what you think, but I think it's just a longer term trend that they've been doing it. There's nothing special that they're going on right now.
Definitely. I mean, it's not just China that's buying gold. We're also seeing other Asian central banks that are buying gold. It's just that all the attention is on China, and then they're actually not seeing the other central banks and the other Asian households also buying gold. Because to be fair, when you're talking about um, wealth preservation, you just want to see any asset that will give you some upside. And gold is not a bad investment. I like gold.
Yeah, let's move on from China onto our main topic, which is on Vietnam today. And so before I start bombarding Eugenia with some questions, I thought I'd give our listeners a little bit of background on Vietnam. So just the basics. So first, GDP, it's about $400 billion, which is about the size of Malaysia or Philippines. And if we compare it to something like Sweden, it's about two-thirds the size in terms of the size of the economy in the marketplace. And it is still a low income place. So GDP per capita, or just like an average how much people earn per year, it's still about $3,700 a year. So that is still low. So in most countries, I think people earn that on a monthly basis. And then some of the positive other things are the population. It's about 100 million, slightly less. So it's bigger than Germany, which is around 83, and Turkey, that's around 81. And kind of competing similar or slightly less than places like Philippines or Japan that have over 100 million. Another thing to know is just the geography. That it's a long country, so it's sort of like Italy. So the length is like if you go from like Zurich to the south of Italy, that's kind of how long the country is. And then kind of like the thing that's catching people's attention is this geopolitics, which is in 2023, Vietnam was the only country where the two kind of superpowers, US and China, their heads of state, President Xi, President Biden, both visited Vietnam, and Vietnam is the only country to receive them. So this is, I think, kind of a good starting point on geopolitics of Vietnam. And whenever it's geopolitics of Vietnam, we hear this word called bamboo diplomacy. So Eugenia, can you explain to us what is bamboo policy and how Vietnam fits in geopolitics of the world?
So bamboo diplomacy is very Asian, actually. If you've been in Southeast Asia, you would see that bamboo trees are really thin, but they're very, very flexible. And in this region, when you see a lot of typhoons, it's very common to see these hardwood trees fall in the middle or after the typhoon, and yet the bamboo is still standing no matter how thin the branches seem to be. And that's actually the story or the narrative behind the bamboo policy. What it requires is that you have very strong roots, and those roots don't move, but then the branches are very flexible. Now, one may think that this is all gimmicky and it's one way for a country like Vietnam to try not to meddle into the diplomatic issues these days. But the truth is, bamboo diplomacy was already introduced as early as 2016 by the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam. Now, that's a lot of words. General Secretary, like, is that similar to President Xi? Now, in Vietnam, authority or the government is really spread among four pillars, and they are theoretically they are supposed to be equal pillars. So these four pillars would be: first would be led by the General Secretary of the Communist Party. Then you have the Prime Minister, which is the head of the government. And then you have the President, which is the head of the state. And then you have the Speaker of the National Assembly, which is the head of the legislative body. In theory, they are supposed to be equal. So basically, in Vietnam, they rule in consensus. But in reality, in Vietnam, the general secretary of the Communist Party is typically the most important. Now, as I said, bamboo diplomacy was introduced in 2016 by the current general secretary of the Communist Party. So that's Nguyen Phu Chung. And it was in 2016 that he first said it. And as I said, it's really based on the bamboo tree. You have strong roots, which means the roots of a socialist country, and it's supposed to protect its independence and national interest. Now, the diplomacy part is that the flexible stems can move and they will adapt according to the different situation. A very good example here is how Vietnam has handled the Russia Ukraine war. First of all, Vietnam has a very strong historical relationship with Russia, and yet it has managed to avoid it putting itself in a corner. And as you already mentioned, Biden went to Vietnam in 2023, but at the same time, President Xi also went to Vietnam. So they're very careful and they're very good at managing that relationship enough for both of these leaders to court their support. Now, as far as Russia and the Ukraine issue is concerned, Vietnam managed to avoid taking a side. And in fact, very few people talk about this, but Vietnam abstained from voting against Russia to call the military aggression as an invasion. Meanwhile, it did not also give its support for Russia in the same way that the Russian allies have given their support in the UN. And I'm talking about not voting in line with the Russian allies like Belarus, North Korea, or Syria. It just abstained. Okay, so they're clearly protecting their independence, and that's your bamboo root. But then their stems are very flexible. So even though they abstained from voting, they also provided financial aid to Ukrainian citizens. Brilliant, isn't it?
And if you try to put things in perspective to understand where they are in this political spectrum, so I guess in Asian context, you have like maybe Japan or Philippines that are more towards the US, and then you have maybe Cambodia that's a bit more towards China's side. And then in the middle is where you would put Vietnam, and like what other countries would be like sort of similar.
I would say the closest would probably be Indonesia, because at the heart of Vietnam's diplomatic policies, they have what you call four no's. They will not have any military alliances. No to taking sides. No to being used as a foreign base. And no to the use of force in international relations. There's a lot of no's there that basically means that they will not take sides, even if you force them to. And they will not be forced to do so.
Yeah, it's hard to send a delegation to Vietnam and ask for something. You just get four no's right away, is there?
But they're also very good because they actually put a level in the kind of diplomatic partnerships that they give to countries. So, I mean, how many countries do you know that have different levels? For example, like there are four levels of diplomatic partnerships. The most important, and I would say the closest, would be having a comprehensive strategic partnership. And very few countries have that. So, you only have China, which was given in 2008, followed by Russia, given in 2012, and then followed by India, South Korea, Japan. The US was only granted this level of partnership in 2023. And then this year, it was Australia. Now, take note, there are no European countries in that list. Now, the second level of diplomatic partnership is what they call strategic partnership. You have the UK and France in that level. And then the third one is comprehensive partnership. It took a long time for the US to be upgraded to comprehensive strategic partnership, but it's now in that level. So you can say that the US, China, and Russia are now on equal footing as far as Vietnam is concerned.
Okay, so they're like a hotel where you have diamond membership, gold and silver, and so you got to work your way up.
Yeah, you got to work your way up with investments and other kinds of commitments. But at the same time, they're not going to give you access to their bases. That's just clear. No military alliances.
It's good that at least you know exactly where you stand in terms of the relationship. Very good. So then we'll go to the next theme. Is it's called the blazing furnace is often referred to, and that is a anti-corruption campaign or a theme. So as we all know, China had this with President Xi starting this in 2013 when he took office. So is it something similar to that? And should we be worried about it that this is going to hurt foreign direct investments?
Well, if you're in the business of being in politics in Vietnam, you should be worried because this blazing furnace has been taking down a lot of people with it. Not like we've seen two presidents resign, one member of the National Assembly, two deputy ministers, and 5 out of 18 Politburo members. And as I said, he's counting names. So who am I saying when I'm saying he? This was started a few years ago by the general secretary of the Communist Party. Now, you can hope that the furnace would maybe die down in a few years because he is expected to step down in 2026. After all, Mr. Nguyen has been the general secretary since 2011, and he's quite up there in age. So by 2026, he's expected to step down. Until then, the blazing furnace will continue. Now, as I said, if you're not in the business of politics, I don't think you really need to be that worried. To be fair, the impact it has had on the economy has been a slowdown in the real estate sector and other related industries because the real estate sector has been very much exposed to the state owned enterprises and the state owned banks. However, there is a risk that because there is now a greater scrutiny on the bureaucracy, it can actually lead to some kind of policy paralysis. Now, policy paralysis is very different from a reversal of policy. And that's what happened in China. There were some policies that were suddenly reversed, and then the business community was just left shocked. In the case of Vietnam, they know they need foreign direct investments, so they're unlikely to reverse any of these structural reforms. It just may slow them down because, nobody wants to be not nobody wants to be burned in this furnace.
Yeah, it's a very dangerous game. And just so make it clear for our listeners, so the general sector you keep on mentioning, his last name is spelled Tron. He's the kind of the main guy.
Yes.
Okay, and then just to give him some credit, I think when he first started this, the goal was that okay, Vietnam is developing, and in order to get to the next level of economic development and become more like China or Korea or Taiwan, it needs to be more efficient to attract foreign direct investment. So that's why he thought he had to clean things up, get rid of red tape, make everything easier for foreigners. But I guess, like you said, it's early in the economic development for them, so they know that they can't clamp down fully because they still need all the investments. So at least the intention is for the economy to get better, and in order to do that, he has to do blazing furnace. Is that your understanding also?
I would think so because actually there has been an improvement in the corruption perception among the foreign investors in Vietnam as well, because there has been a marked decline in the extra curricular payments of businesses just to get some licenses released, or there has also been definitely much less bribes, streamlining the processes. But at the same time, when the furnace is already reaching the bureaucracy, let's say in the provincial level, then you can face the risk that the structural reforms will slow down because those that are implementing it will become afraid to pursue even more reforms just because um, they don't want to be checked even more so.
If we get down to like the industries that they're targeting, in China, it kind of goes from industry to industry in terms of anti-corruption, where you had like pharmaceuticals and medical at one time, you had big tech companies, and then you had like after-school education. These things get shut down. Is that the same thing happening, or I see a lot of real estate is where you see these anti-corruption campaigns going on? Is there a certain logic to the industries that they're targeting?
Well, actually, the real exposed industries, as you said, is the real estate because the real estate really needed connections with the state owned banks. So, if you're doing a lot of business with state owned entities, then the likelihood that you had been involved in some kind of bribery is also higher. Meanwhile, if you are in manufacturing and you don't actually need funding from the government, then the likelihood is that you were not necessarily deeply involved in these illegal transactions. So that's really the goal of this anti-corruption drive. It's mainly to put discipline or to also um, prevent other related parties from benefiting too much from the growth of the country. A little bit too much and much more than what is legal.
Okay, we'll ask about one more topic. So sentiment towards Vietnam is very good, and it is stemming a bit from this China plus one strategy of trying to diversify manufacturing and exports out of China to somewhere else. And Vietnam is definitely the beneficiary. But you've looked at Vietnam for decades. What are the risks that we should be careful of?
Well, as you said, like Vietnam has benefited from the diversification of supply chains. And precisely because it has benefited from that, if we have a return of Trump to the White House, there is nothing stopping Trump from widening the anti trade net that he has cast out in his first term. And why? What some people would be asking, like, why would Trump even bother with a country so small as Vietnam? Because you see, Vietnam as an economy may be small, but it's definitely punching way above its weight when it comes to trade. Because just how many Asian countries can be considered as one of the US's top 10 trading partners. So actually, as of 2023, Vietnam is number 8 in the US's top trading partner. In Europe, only the UK and Germany has a bigger trade than Vietnam. And that happened in a very short period because only in 2017 Vietnam was still trailing behind France, India, Ireland, Italy, Netherlands, and Switzerland as far as its share of the US trade. And I'm just talking about the US trade. Meanwhile, Vietnam is also the seventh largest trading partner of China, the seventh largest trading partner of Japan, the fourth largest trading partner of South Korea. So, yes, Vietnam may only have $400 billion of economy, but it's trading very, very well. Meanwhile, that did not come without cost because if it is the eighth trading partner of the US, you can imagine how big the bilateral trade deficit of the US with Vietnam. And we all know Trump doesn't like trade deficits.
And another thing that kind of came to my mind is that since they're such big trading partners, it reminds me of like Hong Kong or Singapore, where if for some reason the global economy turns, like US heads a recession or Europe goes into recession, they're probably one of the most vulnerable economies in the world.
Well, that really depends on the export basket of Vietnam. And to that end, Vietnam's export basket is very, very diversified. So it is still a very big exporter of agricultural products. So the demand for Vietnam's rice is still very high. At the same time, it is also going up the value added chain. So, what is likely to happen is that it will get market share from the other Asian economies as it has already been doing so. So, clearly, when you have a decline in global demand, then exports will likely go down. But in 2018, when all of the Asian economies had negative growth in exports, only Vietnam had a positive growth. So, I would say that they have a better export basket than most, but if it really goes to a 2008 level crisis, it will not be spared.
So I guess the diversity does help Vietnam in its export basket. I mean, so how are they kind of related to this? How are they dealing with this higher US dollar interest rates, stronger dollar? Is it leading to weakness or maybe a devaluation risk?
So in 2023, it was very difficult for the Vietnam dong to um, to maintain a very stable currency. And in fact, the Vietnam dong had seen a lot of weakness, especially in comparison to the previous years. But when we talk about devaluation in Vietnam, Vietnam has a lot of experience when it comes to devaluation because just in the last, I would say, 15 years, I've definitely seen a number of devaluations from Vietnam in 2012, I would say. But in 2023, officially they did not devalue, but they did widen the trading band. So, we're comparing Vietnam to China, and just like in China, the currency is managed, and just like China, they have a reference rate that is announced daily, and then the dong is allowed to trade within a trading band. Last year, the State Bank of Vietnam widened the trading band to 5%, effectively increasing the trading band by 2%. So overnight there was a weakening of 2%. So you can say that that was a devaluation, but if you're a true Vietnam analyst, it wasn't a devaluation, but a widening of the trading band.
And if you're a company and you have to think about how do I minimize this risk, it's a little bit tough to do because there aren't too many instruments to do this. And I guess if you're in Vietnam, you're thinking about 10 year, 15 years, and your sales and are much better than the 5% depreciation. So you just keep on going. Is that the thinking for corporates?
Well, for most corporates, they go to Vietnam as an exporting hub. So a weaker Vietnam dong is actually better for them because it's just a cost base. Now, if you're looking at Vietnam as a market, then maybe your revenues would be impacted. But when there is a devaluation, it's actually good for your exporters. But as you said, when you are investing in Vietnam, you're not investing based on a 1 year horizon. You're looking at 10, 20 years, and a 5% move overnight is messy for your books, but it's definitely within your margins.
I think we'll try to wrap this up around here. And to me, I have a couple conclusions. So on the China side, I think the property market is having risks to the kind of Chinese corporate behavior, but I think the property is probably bottomed out at least. So it's not going to be a big rebound, but like an L-shaped recovery going on. And then with Vietnam, it looks like there is, if Trump wins in November, there is a risk that he might target Vietnam. It's something to watch. Anything else you want to add, Eugenia?
Nothing else. I just want to know, when are you going to ask me back again? Like, this is really fun.
Well, there are a lot of countries in Asia, so we'll definitely move on to the next one very quickly. All right, very good. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and I hope to see you back. This is SCB's Inside Asia. Thanks for listening, everyone.